Good evening, all of our participants tonight. We're glad to have you. I am Vera Perkins Hughes, the president of the African American Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University. And it is my good pleasure to welcome you this evening. The African American Alumni Association of Case Western was officially established in 2009, and our purpose is to provide support and networking opportunities to African American alum of CWRU. And we work to provide a forum for the university to recruit students and foster friendship among persons connected with the university. So if you haven't heard of us, talk to me or send me a chat and some information. I'll get back to you. So I hope that you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. It's been a trying time in America and throughout the world, and we're just glad to have all of you tonight. Before we begin our program tonight, I'd like to give a few quick housekeeping notes. First, everyone is going to be muted by default, and we want you to please remain muted to limit background noise during the program. We know that some of you have submitted questions prior to our beginning tonight, and we hope to get to all of those questions this evening. If you should have any additional questions, please utilize the chat feature, and we will do our best to get them answered. So that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on participants. I see it on the bottom of my screen, it has a couple people bodies shaped. So click on participants, find your own name, and then using the more option, click on more, and then rename yourself so that we'll know exactly who everyone is. And then we ask you to please turn on your video because we'd love to see your smiling faces. We are still living in recluse style. So let's see your faces and say good evening to each one. Finally, we are happy to welcome you to this installment of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and the African and African American Studies to highlight the work and research of African American Black faculty. Again, thank you for being a part of this evening. We appreciate you. And I would now like to share a little information about this evening's featured guest. Dr. Carolyn Steele is an assistant professor at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve University. She received her BSN in 2002, her MSN in 2006 from Florida A&M University, and then she completed her PhD in 2010 and business degree in 2016 from Case Western Reserve University, making her a double alum. She is board certified as an adult geriatric primary care nurse practitioner and practices in the Cleveland Brain Health and Memory Center at University Hospitals of Cleveland. As a clinician and nurse scientist, improving cardiovascular health in minority populations has been the focus of her clinical practice and research. Dr. Steele's research expertise include hypertension clinical trials in older population, psychosocial assessment and management of chronic diseases in older adults, recruitment and retention of minorities in clinical trials. She has over 13 years experience managing, coordinating centers and conducting quality assurance monitoring for multi-site clinical trials, as well as experience in leading and conducting multidisciplinary clinical trials. And Dr. Steele's evolving program of research, she addresses gaps in knowledge to improve cardiovascular health in minorities by evaluating the feasibility and scalability of interventions to support and sustain self-management of cardiovascular conditions such as hypertension and stroke. She was recently awarded the NIH multiple PIRO1 for targeting secondary stroke risk reduction in African American men at high risk for recurrent stroke. The body of work she has amassed nearly 2.9 million in external funding. And Dr. Steele has extensively published in the area of health disparities, minority health, and hypertension clinic and outcome trials, having a significant impact on practice and policy. She has received several awards for this work, including an early career award by the American Heart Association. Dr. Steele is a natural leader and has served on many regional and national advisory panels. She has held national leadership coordinating the development of data collection and data management procedures and quality assurance standards across the SPRINT, S-P-R-I-N-T trial, as well as served as chair of the trials project coordinator and operations committee, a member of the executive committee. Now she currently serves as a board member of the Midwestern Nursing Research Society and Cleveland Council of Black Nurses. In addition, Dr. Steele is co-chair of the Health of Diverse Population Research Interest Group and co-chair of the Diversity Task Force. So our host this evening for this program will be Dr. Heather Burton. Dr. Burton is Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity with Case Western Reserve University, specializing in gender and racial equity. Dr. Burton also serves as acting co-director for the African American Studies program. And now I turn the program over to Dr. Heather Burton. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Vera. Thank you so much. And welcome to everyone for sharing with us this evening. We are excited about our faculty profiles, and we have highlighted some great faculty over the academic year since we began. And I think our first one, Vera and Crystal, was October. I think our first one was in October. And so we have been able to highlight Black faculty on campus since October, and we have our schedule planned through the next academic year. But I'm excited tonight because we have Dr. Carolyn Steele with us. And I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Steele from a student recommendation. And it speaks volumes when students recommend faculty to you. I was looking for faculty mentors for a program that I was working with for our NOAA AGAT. And so I was looking for mentors in nursing to work with a student. And one of my mentees that I work with here on campus was like, I got the perfect person for you from nursing. And so lo and behold, that was Dr. Steele. And in that, I learned so many great things about Dr. Steele. And I've already told her that I plan some additional work for her, especially when we get a couple of things up and running. And one is because she is one of our few Black faculty on campus that is also an HBCU graduate, so a historically Black college university graduate. And she understands that transition from graduates, from undergrad, from an HBCU to a predominantly white institution, especially when we're talking about graduate programs. But Dr. Steele, we start every interview for the faculty profiles of inclusive excellence with the same question. And that question is, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Brown Sugar, but if you remember Taye Diggs and Sanaa Lathan, and the whole theme throughout that movie was, when did you fall in love with hip hop? So what we do with our profiles of excellence is we take that question, we ask that question as it relates to your discipline. So the question becomes, Dr. Steele, when did you fall in love with nursing?
Oh gosh, such an early age. I would say around middle school. So I don't know if you know, I was born and raised in Central Florida. To be exact, Orlando, in a single parent home. And while my mother was single, we debate this to this day. She was not single. She had my great grandmother to support. So it was two women as head of the household, right? So Miss Ernestine was always present, and she helped raise me and my 5 siblings. So when I was in middle school, I would say around the 7th or 8th grade, my grandmother at an early age started forgetting things, including taking care of herself. She had concomitant conditions such as diabetes and hypertension. And then later she developed cognitive decline that progressed fairly fast. So my mother tried to allow her to, have as much independence as possible, but she was commuting back and forth from Sanford, Florida to Orlando, and it became like a huge burden. So my grandmother, eventually she came to live with us, and then we were compressed into this sandwich generation where my mother was responsible for her children as well as my grandmother. And then, needless to say, my grandmother condition progressed. And oh my gosh, she would wander outside at night, let out the family dogs. She almost set our house on fire. So by the time I reached the 10th grade, she required around the clock care. And I encountered a home health care nurse, and she would come in 3 days a week. And I was just fascinated with the care that she provided, as well as the wealth of knowledge she had to share with our family, and her genuine, just caring nature. And so all of my sisters and my mother, we all had our designated roles. And of course, no one wanted to give the injections, the finger sticks for the blood glucose, or change the feeding tube dressing. So naturally I volunteered and had a nick for it. And so it sparked, my interest into becoming a nurse. And so I completed my BSN and master's degree at Florida A&M University. So while doing my nursing rotation, we go through peds and, the various specialties. And I, didn't like children at that time. And so geriatric was like my niche, and so once I, went into my professional nursing career, I worked on an intensive care unit specifically for diabetes. And I witnessed so many health disparities that really plagued communities. And, I knew that I really wanted to focus on minority health, especially in geriatric population. So I think that's, how my interest spawned into really wanting to get into geriatric care.
Yeah, and that's a great story, because you don't hear often, and especially you don't hear often where a young person knows what they want to do at a young age, but then they follow it, and it stays the same trajectory as they move throughout. And so to be able to identify and know that based on your grandmother, that was what led you to nursing and the interest in geriatric care, which I want to talk about your research and some of the things that you're doing around that. But first, I need to ask a clarifying question that I heard in the bio. And this wasn't one of my questions, but I heard this in your bio, is that PhD in 2010, and then a business degree followed. So tell me a little bit about the business degree following the PhD in 2010.
Well, that saying when they say you are a lifelong learner. I think I was at that point where I had been, I literally, let me just step back and say, have been in school the bulk of my life. And so when I had that period where I graduated, although I had a great, project to work on, I was still missing that, information gathering that I needed to try something different. But also, I think with working on research projects, you have to understand the business aspect behind it. When you have large grants, you have to manage budgets. You have to know where the money goes. And as a wise person told me, I don't look good in orange. So, you have to know where those dollars are. So I figured I would go ahead and step into the business side to understand the healthcare aspects of it.
That makes all the sense in the world. And I don't know who your wise person is that told you about the orange, because that is my saying all the time, that I don't look good in County Orange. But and I was having a conversation earlier talking about, federal dollars, and how very often when you have to start doing or managing federal funds, you don't realize the stipulations when it comes to grant management. And this is how individuals end up in some trouble, with grant dollars, losing jobs, or even, like you said, the end is jail time. And so that is excellent. And I think that's something that, it's one of those things of you recommending to others with the business. Now, the business degree, was that a
Master's of Science in Healthcare Management.
Okay. So thank you for sharing. I heard that in the bio, and I said, well, let's clarify the business degree after the PhD, which makes sense in the lifelong learning and then understanding how to manage grants. And so speaking of grants, you recently received the NIH grant. Tell us a little bit about that grant and the research behind it.
So I received a $2.8 million grant August 2019, and it's a multi-PI grant, and it's titled Target Management Intervention Team, and it's a curricular-based intervention led by nurses as well as peer educators, and it really targets culturally tailored interventions to reduce secondary risks of a stroke. And so, we were on pause for a while because of COVID. We had literally just received a grant, and then we had to go through a lot of reiterations to shift to technology in the COVID environment, but we're targeting African American men who had stroke within the last 5 years. And so this curriculum basically incorporates their care partner and a peer diet that has gone through the experience. So it's like each one teach one type of setup where the groups meet over a series of months and just discuss how they've managed their stroke outcomes in terms of diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and things of that nature.
Okay. So that so how did you get involved with wanting to study strokes and then this particular population of males? Because you have other research interests as well, which I want to talk about also. But how did you kind of veer to this direction?
So with hypertension, when we know uncontrolled hypertension leads to numerous adverse events, including stroke. And when you look at stroke and the health disparities among the African American men have the worst health and outcomes as it relates to stroke. And so this naturally made sense to focus on this particular population. We know that African American men delay healthcare. 9 out of 10, they probably have not been to a doctor within, I don't know how many years. I go through that with my husband where I have to send notes to the doctor with him, and and so it's real. And African American men, once they collectively come into these groups, they share their experiences and know that that there are better ways in which they can manage their health with support. And I think that's the importance of these particular curriculum type interventions targeted towards African American men.
So I know that, as I should say, so what do you find more satisfaction, pleasure in, being a clinician or doing the research?
Oh, I love both. And I think that's the beauty of the nursing profession, that we have so many areas that we can apply a niche to, or just have a wealth of experience from the administration teaching side to the clinician side, and definitely the research side. So my passion initially was in the clinical area, where I got to spend one-on-one time with African Americans. They saw someone that looked like them, and they were hearing the advice that was given to them regarding their health. So in Tallahassee, when I did my clinical rotation, it was in rural areas, and so they appreciated having someone to give them to care for them that looked like them, and more readily accepted the advice that was given to them. So I enjoy that, but I definitely enjoy the research side as well.
The sprint trial, the NIH sprint trial. Explain to those that may have heard that in your bio, what that entails and what is that?
So the sprint trial is a landmark trial on a number of fronts, and basically it was designed to test whether treating systolic blood pressure to a lower target goal would in fact reduce cardiovascular disease. And we enrolled, I think I said about 9,300 participants. We had approximately 30% African American and 11% Hispanic. So it was a very diverse trial. And so the outcome was basically that there was a 27% reduction in all-cause mortality and regardless of race, ethnicity, or age, hypertensive individuals benefited from the lower targeted goal. And this trial was very important in terms that it sort of guided the current hypertension guidelines that were changed, in fact, to have blood pressure targets recommended to the lower goal of 130 over 80 versus the 140 that was previously recommended. And so it changed the way in which providers are recommended treating blood pressure, which is more aggressively and not delaying treatment in terms of pharmacological agents. So one of the things I've noticed, though, prior to that, when I was, working as a clinician, is that individuals were not receiving the right recommendations in terms of being prescribed medications. And so individuals were told, oh, you may have prehypertension. And I think that was a category, in terms of the previous guidelines, prehypertension, hypertension, stage 1, stage 2. And I used to always tell, and still do tell my students, that there is no halfway being pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. And I think we have to start considering that when we're talking to, disadvantaged groups that are at high risk for some of these chronic conditions, that, treatment is the best option and not delay treating them. One, we miss opportunities to get them while they're in clinic. Who knows when they may return or will return back to the clinic. So it's important to, educate them as much as possible, but also treat them with the best practices that are out there and available. So, yeah.
Do you think, my mind was going in two different directions, but because I wanted to go back to the standards of blood pressure. Now, you said now the new standards or the new guidelines are 140 over, just so that everyone can hear. And we know on this call that if we're not in that range, what we need to be doing to make sure that we're being taken care of also.
So the new guidelines recommend individuals be treated to a lower blood pressure target of 130 over 80, less than 130 over 80. Previously, it was treatment at 140 over 80, and I believe prior to that, it was even as high as 150 over 90 to begin initial treatment for blood pressure. Okay,
so me understanding this in my layman terms is that previously, they would start prescribing medication. They wouldn't prescribe medication or treatment until you were at the 140 over 90
correct.
Or the 150. That my blood pressure runs very low. So we have a joke in my family that if my blood pressure goes up to 120 over 60 or over 70, that they need to rush me to the hospital immediately. But it's interesting that treatment didn't happen until those higher numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Have they noticed that there's been a decrease in terms of blood pressure numbers? Are people being more aware, or is just that this is the guidelines to say, hey, this is when the treatment needs to happen because we're risking more strokes and more additional diseases or additional responses when we let blood pressure go this high?
With my recent study just completed last year upon entry, and it focused on older African Americans with high blood pressure. And so many of them were not prescribed the right medication or the number of medications to help them reduce their blood pressure. So if they had a blood pressure of 150, the average person was prescribed one medication, which our previous research in Sprint showed that minorities, especially African Americans, may need as many as 3 anti-hypertension agents in order to control their blood pressure. So it's still some disconnect. It has been some hesitancy among providers in terms of clinical inertia of whether or not they will prescribe treatment. Change is hard for some folks, and not understanding that and still sticking to the previous guideline makes it much harder to try to control blood pressure in certain populations.
Which makes me think, and I know you're aware of the disparities that exist, especially when we're talking on both sides in terms of treatment and treating, like you said, certain populations, and being aware and what needs to be put in place so that those things are changed, and to treat certain communities, specifically African Americans, with a different mindset than what you treat the majority. And this is fascinating to me. I'm sorry, listening audience, that I'm just fascinated by these numbers with blood pressure. And now the medication, that it takes 3 pills to lower medication. And I'll share with you, Dr. Steele, I remember being in the pharmacy. I was at the drugstore, and I was standing behind someone in line, and they were filling a prescription. It was a mother and a son. And the pharmacist cashier said, that'll be $1,000. And I was like, what did you all just get? And it came out of my mouth before actually realizing these people are not with me. I don't know who they are, but I was just so dumbfounded by hearing $1,000 for prescription. And so that was for insulin, and they had reached their insurance had been reached to the max for that particular month. So they had to pay out of pocket. But in thinking of that, when we think about blood pressure medications, and if it takes 3, how does that financially also impact the individual and the community when we're talking about this? Like, how does that come into consideration?
So with most drugs, you have your generic and you have your brand agents that could be prescribed. And I think this is where we have to really understand how social determinants of health play a role in health maintenance for certain populations, and querying individuals about this information, and not just assuming that they can afford what you consider the best brand is one of the things that providers have to take into account when prescribing certain agents. And many of them have been around for decades. And so, you can get a 90-day supply for $4. So it's just understanding the individual's circumstances and what medications are on the formulary that can be prescribed accordingly. And they probably need more Dr. Steeles in the rooms with the patients that understand. There's a question that's coming from the chat that I want to ask you, and it says, what is the best way for communities of color to advocate for their health and the health of their loved ones? So we're in this age of technology, and we call them internet surfers. So, ask a nurse, or if you have that family member that you can ask a question, and based on whatever knowledge you have, don't be afraid to ask that question, because what you want is a response to the question from a provider while you're, face to face with them. So one of the things we're trying to empower our research patients, with many of the national campaigns that are going on. Know your numbers. What does it mean? What does the top number mean? What does the bottom number mean? So that they can arm themselves with some information to ask the doctor or their provider what's next. But what we're finding out in the community is that a lot of individuals, especially minorities, have had hypertension on average of 16 years plus. They are knowledgeable. They are knowledgeable about their conditions. They are aware, but getting them to change lifestyles and health behaviors is a different entity. So have to work towards that. So they are knowledgeable.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting because I think that is that's one of the strong things that you say. And the key is that one, and I, I see desire in some people to want to change, but because they don't have the tools to know how to change and to really put it in place, they can't. And then also by surrounding family members, because it's also hard to create that change when you have additional people surrounding you who aren't supporting the change and making the change. I've watched, like with church, some of our people who are diabetic, and you're looking at them, and I'm like, didn't you just have some cake or something? Why are you eating some more? And it's just that natural behavior, and then we know too, as a community, as Black people, we like to eat because eating is the social gathering that brings us together for community, is around food. And, you think about Sunday dinners and all of that. And so, yeah, I can imagine that there are many people who know, but to try to change the lifestyle and eating. I change my eating, Dr. Steele, probably every other day, trying to figure out how I'm gonna do better. There's another question that comes from the chat. Which comes first, diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, or heart attack?
Do you think you're smarter than a clinician? Vascular disease starts early on, especially in childhood. So it just depends, some people have diabetes and may not have hypertension, but it's a vascular component. So there's no specific order in which condition will appear. But treading down that path where your vascular system is, slowly but surely becoming blocked, something is bound to happen, whether it's a stroke or, diabetes or cardiovascular disease of that nature. So there's no specific order.
Like you said, tying in. Every time I think or hear diabetes, all I think about is the woman in the drugstore and that $1,000, and it makes me put down that extra piece of chocolate cake. Or every time I turn, I was like, I cannot afford to pay $1,000 for medication. But I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about your transition to Case. Mm-hmm. And how did you end up choosing Case Western Reserve and I have a reason for asking these questions, because I know some of the story and the experience of you still being here. And so just kind of sharing that with our listening audience. But how did you pick Case Western Reserve for your school, for the nursing program, for your PhD?
Oh, yeah. So at Florida A&M has a partnership with Case Western Reserve University, and the goal of the program is to increase diversity into graduate programs. And so while I was working on my master's, my dean at the time was friends with a colleague here at Case Western Reserve University. And so she was like, do you have anybody that wants to work on a PhD? She's like, yeah, I know. And so this was decided before I could even give an answer. So, I respect my elders. And, at the time, she basically said, you have no life. You're going to Cleveland. You're going to work on your PhD. And so, within a 2-week span, that's what I did. I literally jumped up and moved to Cleveland to work on my PhD. So it was the network of someone knowing someone in Cleveland. And when I thought about it, and just being so Southern, and I was like, oh, okay, Cleveland, I could drive back and forth. I like to hit the road, and I could drive back and forth to Cleveland. So when I looked on the map, I thought they were talking about Cleveland, Tennessee. And then she was like, oh no, Cleveland, Ohio. And I was like, oh, it snows. So, but long story short, that's, the program that was introduced to me was the Greater Area of National Needs, the GAN Fellowship, in which I was awarded and pursued my PhD.
And I think that story is very familiar. I know that's my story also, is that I ended up in my PhD program because of a faculty saying, no, you're going to get your PhD. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, yes, you are. And we went back and forth on the no's and the yeses for a while. And he literally handheld and walked me through. And I attribute to Dr. Larry Terry from Cleveland State University to being the only reason that I have a PhD, because I was dead set on no. And I say that because I think that is the experience for many Black students, is that they have someone who says, this is what you're going to do. And then we say, okay, well, I guess it's not unreasonable. I can do it. But in that also led to a second part of your story as to why you're still here at Case Western Reserve.
Oh,
and so we know that you've had some great mentorship with the institution, as well as you serving as a great mentor for students. And so share with everyone one of the main reasons that you are still a part of Case Western Reserve University.
Oh, yes. Two people come to mind. So when I arrived at Case Western Reserve University, Dr. Faye Gary was my mentor and dissertation chair. And so I had the privilege of learning a lot from her, as well as Dr. Gary socializing me into a community of just prominent and well-renowned scholars. This extended out to the University of Virgin Islands, to across the country. So I was fortunate to have one of those mentor groups that, believed in me. And then, after I completed my PhD, at the time, Mae Weichel was the dean of Case Western Reserve University, and she introduced me to Dr. Jackson Wright, and I was able to begin working with the systolic blood pressure trial. And so I had Dr. Wright as a great mentor to navigate me through a multi-site clinical trial, as well as taking the time to invest in my professional development. So we would set up weekly meetings and, okay, what are you going to do? And I'm looking like, what do you mean? What am I going to do? And so just investing in my development, which helped propel my career tremendously, and just exposing me to different things at a national level. Sitting at the table at some time, we were, one of two people of color in a room of 100, and, just having that, like, wow, I'm at the table moment, and contributing in a leadership role. So I just, I think people are placed in your life for a reason. And if one door closes, another door will open. Be patient. And I think that has happened thus far for me. And I'm just very fortunate.
Yep. And I wanted you to share that because I think it's very important. And especially when we're talking about our faculty on campus, and the highlight is just how you're still here because of the support system. And when we talk about retention efforts, it's creating that community that existed and support system for you. I know that you and I have talked about the data and the statistics and the number of women, specifically when we talk about Black women, when it comes to being PhD students, when it comes to the field of nursing. And I think statistically only 2% of faculty are Black women. What do you think some of the challenges are for Black women in general when it comes to higher education and working within certain disciplines?
Well, I think it is the lack of mentorship is probably number one. The lack of not being able or socialized into large networks to build their program of research. And I think that really hinders them from progressing, and they may feel isolated, despaired, And it may typically end in not completing a PhD, or for that matter, matriculating through academic ranks.
As part of where would you like to see, or what would you like to see your role when it comes to mentoring, working, encouraging additional Black women when we talk about especially students and PhDs?
As a wise person told me, pay it forward. So I do intend to do that. I do that currently. So I'm hoping that it will change eventually, the numbers, and starting to see more people that look like me in the field, not just nursing, but, you know, on an academic level, academia level.
Yes, and I think it's the necessity that we have, because there needs to be more. And I know, you know, we're all working to change the numbers and moving forward. I do have a statement. I was trying to read it to see if there was a statement or a question in the chat, but from Jackson Wright: I was winding down my career and needed help. I think that all realized that I was more the beneficiary of the talents of Dr. Steele. She went quickly to a seat on the executive committee of that large multi-center sprint trial and amassed a huge publication portfolio. So there was a little credit given back to you on the work. And I think someone said earlier too, that when we talk about this on the in the chat, when mentors become sponsors, is transformative. And I think that's the difference, is that, you know, there was a mentorship role, but then it became that sponsor role, and in that sponsorship role, like Jackson Wright, Dr. Faye Geary, they knew that you possessed the talents and the skills to move forward. And they were just putting you in the space to say, now, hey, you move forward and you go. We've talked about your research, and we've talked about, you know, in the field of nursing, and I shared earlier, especially when I think about of Dion Williams, who referred me to you, and how great she's done under your guidance as a student, and now in Atlanta, you know, moving forward with her PhD, soon to be a graduate. And in that, what advice would you offer to students who are thinking about pursuing a nursing degree?
I would say go for it. And I would also encourage them to seek out support early, utilize me if they have to, and don't be afraid. Put yourself out there and ask for help early. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. And I think a lot of times our students of color are fearful to ask for help, you know, and it may be that their confidence level is low and they do not want to ask for help. And I think we have to alleviate that stigma, that it is okay to ask for help and that you don't have to go at this alone. There is support. Yeah,
definitely. And I think you said it great, is that understanding that there is support and there are people that want to assist and want to help. You may run into that one or two who you're questioning, do you want me here? But there are a number of others that are there to help. If there are any questions for Dr. Steele, we do ask that you put those in the chat, and we will ask of those questions. What I will ask is, with you being in Cleveland, you've been here for a while.
Yes.
And so what is it that you like to do in Cleveland?
Let's see. So I have to entertain my 8-year-old daughter and my 4-year-old son. So I tour Cleveland like I do not live here with them. When I wind down with my husband, we are sports fans. So we do a lot of sports activity pre-COVID. But also my husband is an engineer. So we're not one of these famous people that do fix up stuff on whatever these HD TVs are, but we do try. So, but you know, I'll be more or less the moderator and he does all the work, but I stand in the background. But we do projects of that nature. So We do a lot of house projects. So seems like every, I don't know, around the winter months, we start a project. So, but I've utilized it to my advantage. I've gotten, custom shoe closets and, custom cabinets around the fireplace. So he's handy. I gotta keep him. But,
So now you and your husband have done those projects together?
yes.
Did you do, what projects did you do during COVID?
So COVID, my husband has started, the space under the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to turn into like a storage space. So he's cut out all the walls under the store. So that's the project we're working on now. Previous to that, we were doing a custom shoe closet. So.
Wow, I may have to hire y'all. You can come do and you can stand behind. And I'll leave.
Yeah, also doing COVID. So I have 5 sisters. One is my twin, and we have cook-off. So we like to cook and compare who has the best looking food. Not that it tastes good, but that which one looks the best. So we do that, and my husband tries to cook too.
So with you enjoying cooking, what do you like to cook?
Some dishes. Let's see. Oxtails.
You're doing real cooking.
Yeah.
You're taking us some soul food cooking.
Yes, soul food, oxtails, fish. I think the last dish my sister and I, we cooked some lamb stew, and I think she cooked plantains and something with it. So my mother's from the island, and she is the better cook. I just won't tell her that. She captures it well. So I pretend to cook though, but it's eatable. So that's all that matters.
Right. That's all that matters, is that everyone's still alive after your cooking. I do have a couple questions from the chat that I want to get in. And the one is, because there's a shortage of Black faculty, how do you balance the demands of family, research, teaching, and service, given the tax minority faculty often pay in the effort to give back?
That is a great question. I have found the balance. Initially, when I started in 2017, I did not know how to say no. And it became very, very burdensome. But now I have no qualms with saying no and just really prioritizing what I can handle. And I think that has helped shape how my productivity has turned out in terms of my research. So I limit myself to a certain amount of committees and what I engage in, because time is energy, and you can't get it back, once you decide to take on all of these tests. So I really choose wisely what I say yes to.
That makes sense. I heard, I was listening to some earlier today, and it was talking about being able to say no, and knowing that, and especially when we're talking about, self-care and taking care of ourselves specifically as Black women, is that learning to say no and choosing wisely when you say yes. And I joke and I always say no is a complete sentence.
Yeah.
I don't have to give you justification or anything. No is a complete sentence. And so kind of to close us out this evening, I will ask this last question that actually is a great question that came in from the chat. And it is, what do you hope the lasting impact of your work will be?
Great question. I hope the lasting impact of my work will, in fact, improve cardiovascular health in minorities, and that I'm able to serve as a legacy of helping other students that look like me and others of color, achieve, these goals of higher degrees, or more or less undergrad degrees as well. So, yeah.
And it's a great goal and a lasting impact. And I say, the work that you have done and the work that you will continue to do, I know that it is going to make a difference within not only the institution of Case Western Reserve, but also within the Black community. So We thank you for your work and your commitment to Case Western Reserve University. And we thank you for staying with us. And I told you that before, that we're going to make sure you stay and not go anywhere, because you know how people like to poach our Black people and take y'all away. We're not letting you go. But I thank you, Dr. Steele, for being with us this evening and sharing your story and letting us get to know you, and not only just your research, but get to know you and the things that you like to do and the things that you like to share in and with. And I thank the African and African American Studies minor for being a sponsor, the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and the African American Alumni Association. And I will turn the program back over to Vera or Crystal for final remarks. And I think they have dates for our next Faculty of Profile Excellence. So again, thank you, Dr. Steele, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Steele. What you've said has been very interesting to me. I lost a dad to a heart attack and a mom to a stroke. And I have a husband who's diabetic. So that was my question, what comes first? Because they all seem to have started with something, and I don't know what. All I know is this pre-diabetic and high blood pressure, a lot of African Americans were told that back in the day, like my mom and dad, and they were not on medication. So I'm glad for your work. I enjoyed your presentation, and I know all of our guests did tonight. And we want to thank you, Dr. Steele, for everything that you are doing and will be doing in the future to help alleviate some of these problems that we are still having with cardiovascular disease. So we thank you for that. We thank Dr. Burton and everyone for putting all of this together through the Office of Inclusion and Diversity. Our next profile of inclusive excellence with the College of Arts and Science, Professor Dr. Emmett Jolie, will be on April 29th. That's April 29th, 2021. So mark your calendars for that and look for the emails. Also, the African American Alumni Association on Thursday, April 8th, will have Afro Beats. That's time for self-care. We did them back in the fall and everybody really enjoyed them. So join us for this dance fitness workshop. I look to see you there, Heather. It will help us, get rid of some of the stress, a real fun one. And it will be led by Kristen Minich, Mintah. I can't pronounce it, but anyway, a fine young man. This event is sure to get the heart pumping, and it's tons of fun. For more information about the African American Alumni Association at CASE, go to case.edu alum and follow us on Facebook, Case Western Reserve University African American Alumni Association, or you can search us at CWRU AAAA Alumni. So we thank you, and we thank you, Crystal, for everything. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.